Death, Blue Rose. Yggdrasil was upon them, and they could see undead skeletons pouring out of its gates and the sounds of screaming mixed with the sounds of the horses galloping rung in their ears. Gazef raised his sword and screamed. All right men. Charge. The men and women roared at his words. It was time to place their lives on the line for the greater good. Arthur quickly ordered his horse to run ahead, outpacing everyone else before pulling out his sword. The gate to enter Yggdrasil was swarmed with undead, and as well as the perimeter outside. As such, in order to properly show off his skills, Arthur pulled out a practice sword rather than Excalibur and swung it horizontally, and in an instant multiple slashes flew through the air and eviscerated the undead that blocked their way, rendering them into a pile of bones. I'll clear the way, Arthur shouted as his horse sped through the gate. With a single swing from a sword, he had completely removed all obstacles and successfully awed all those who saw him. Gazef, as well as the members of Blue Rose, felt a sense of rivalry emerge within them. They weren't about to be outdone by the newcomer. Having entered the city, he was barely given time to think as he was immediately swarmed by countless undead that came from every corner of every building. The white skeletons rushed towards him with malicious intent. Seeing an undead up close and not on television or on his phone was an experience he never had before. It was a jarring thing to witness, but it only served to excite him more. He quickly snapped out of his reverie. Dealing with this many undead would be difficult, however with Sukuna's technique, dealing with them was child's playing. Having sheathed the sword, he used his hands. While fillet and dismantle was a slicing technique and would seem more suitable with a sword, it was actually better when you use it without a sword, or at least Arthur thought so. He swung his arms much like a sword, using his fingers to direct the technique and minutely control the slashes, and within seconds he quickly sliced and diced all nearby enemies, once again reducing them to rubble. The undead never knew what hit them as their undead lives were cut short. Unfortunately, the buildings nearby suffered damage as well. Whoops! He exclaimed as he furthered in his advanced with his horse. Usually horses and animals in general freak out at the mere sight of undead. Of course that only applies to horses that are not equipped with items that give fear resistance and are not given buffs by magic casters. All the horses that were used by Gazef's troops and adventurers tonight were all equipped with fear resistance items. Of course, the backup troops that were to aid should the initial attack fail didn't have such items. Better head straight for the guild before going to the cemetery and taking care of Khajet and Clementine. He reasoned. The reason why they were taking horses with them in the city was to provide a way to transport any citizens out of city as fast as possible while they stay behind to deal with the undead. Of course this was under the impression that all undead have been cleared out to allow the horses to flee with whoever they're carrying without issues. She's definitely smart, I'll give her that. He smiled as he spoke. While the plan itself is simple, the fact that she's the one who came up with it is a big deal and will help establish a position of power for her, and if he manages to defeat Khajet, that will only further make it clear that she's not just a princess, and at the same time it will boost his own reputation as well. It was a win-win situation for her. Even if he doesn't take down the threat, the nobles would underestimate him, and she would be able to use that in her favor. This was much more multi-layered than I thought. Him gaining a reputation and attracting the attention of the nobles and drawing out any spies was simply the first layer. He had foolishly thought he could comprehend her level of genius. As expected of. He paused before he could finish that sentence and placed a hand on his chin. He wasn't about to become a demiurge, was he? Being her yes man was definitely something he didn't want to happen, so he will have to be careful not to be too impressed. As he rode, he could hear the sound of fighting and voices of casters casting spells, and he noted that he was close to the guild. Gazef and the others entered the city mere seconds after Arthur entered, however he was already out of sight. Gazef signaled everyone to slow their pace. Moving fast with horses while in an area with obstacles such as houses and as a group is definitely not ideal. Lycius immediately gave a signal to two of her teammates that immediately disappeared, and her eyes took in the sight she saw. Lord Stranoff, are you seeing this? Lycius had her horse move close to Gazef as she asked her question, referring to the damage to the houses and no trace of the undead. Unlike monsters, undead do not leave anything behind when they are killed, they simply disappear. The leader of Blue Rose then gave a nod to another woman wearing a mask who, in turn, began to levitate high in the air, understanding what her leader was implying. It looks like the slash of light technique that I use, but I didn't see flashes of light, plus the technique requires firm footing to be properly used. Gazef explained as they moved forward steadily. Arthur did say he was from another continent, perhaps he used a similar technique. It was quite interesting. He wondered about the type of martial arts Arthur knew, perhaps he knew some magic as well. It was a shame that the two of them never got to spar before now. If you do not mind me asking, Lord Stranoff, but who was that person? Lycius asked curiously. She had seen Arthur in Renner's chambers, but she had never got the chance to actually speak to him. Gazef seemed to know him, so she figured asking him would help get a good idea of who Arthur is. Yeah, I ditto that boss. We were just behind that guy, yet he managed to clear out both the ones that were outside and inside. A guy that's skilled has gotta be famous or at least well known. Another member of Blue Rose spoke. She was Gagaron, a large-built woman wearing maroon-red armor, and she carried a large hammer at her back. Her looks were not very feminine. Although her voice was similar to that of a man, it was still clear to everybody who heard it that it belonged to a woman. I'm afraid you're going to have to ask the man yourselves, but for the time being let's see if there are any leftover undead. The civilians will use this route to escape, so we need to be thorough. Already on it, Lord Stranov. 2 of my teammates should arrive to inform us about that. Just as Lycius finished speaking, 2 slender blonde women arrived before her and kneeled. The 2 women wore similar outfits that seemed to have been designed with agility and speed in mind. Tina, what did you find? Nothing much, boss. We found a few skeletons, but we took care of them. This part of the city is clear. Good, the undead are drawn towards places with life, so that means there's probably no live civilians here. Alright men, half of you will look for any retrievable bodies, and the rest of us will move forward. Keep your guard up and be vigilant. The men agreed to his command and began to spread out in groups of 4, even when Gazef didn't explicitly state that they had to group up. It was common sense to do so in such situations, plus the warrior troops were veterans who knew how to properly behave in this type of situation. Lycius, we have a problem. The masked woman descended from the sky and spoke, her voice carrying a grave tone that hinted that there was danger afoot. Rip to the goat Akira Toriyama. His works brought great joy and excitement in my childhood, and I owe my love for anime to him. 10 comments, 0 vote. Death. Lycius v Clementine. Lycius, we have a problem. The masked woman descended from the sky and spoke. Despite the danger regarding the situation, her voice was calm and held no hint of urgency. What is it, Evil Eye? I'm sensing massive amounts of negative energy directly at the cemetery. It's dangerous to let something like negative energy permeate in the air for too long. For now it's focused on a single area, but soon it will spread. Evil Eye explained with severity, in her voice becoming more apparent. Her petite frame was covered in a crimson-red cloak, and she wore a mask hiding her face. Her words caused Lycius to frown. Bringing so many people may have been faulty. Negative energy is very dangerous to living beings. As an energy that brings the dead back to life, it robs those who are alive of their life force, so if one is exposed to it for too long they'll end up dead. Lady Lycius, I take it the area with the high concentration of negative energy is where the mastermind for all this is located. Yes, most likely. The fewer people that attack that place, the less casualties among the troops. I see, me and my troop will help the people, and since the Lady Evil Eye seems to be the expert, I take it's alright to hit up your team. Lycius nodded, however before she could speak the sound of something crashing loudly onto something interrupted her and caused everyone to suddenly turn their heads toward the Adventurers Guild. They saw smoke, and right after such an explosion the sounds of a horse's echoed as they got closer and closer. Everyone waited for a few seconds until they finally saw the horse. Looks like Sir Arthur has already begun the rescue. Let's move people. And clear the way for the horse. Gazef ordered, and they began to move. There was no need to stop the oncoming horse, so they just let it pass through. It seemed that Arthur chose to prioritize children first, as they saw the horse carrying 5 children. While the horses galloped, Lycius gestured to her teammates to lead their horses near her and began to tell them the plan. Aside from her and Evil Eye, the other 3 members were just below Adamantite class, meaning that there are things they couldn't handle and had to leave it to the other 2, which was what Lycius has planned to do. Sorry to have to sideline you like this. She apologized. As team leader, she knew the strength and weaknesses of her comrades and understood what they were capable of. However, she still felt a bit bad having them to not participate properly in the subjugation of an enemy, plus this wasn't a proper quest, so there should be no issue of unfairness. Don't worry about it. If the situation is that dangerous, then we can only leave it up to 2. We'll do our best on this side of things. Gagaron informed, and the twins seemed to agree with her. As adventurer, they knew what they can and cannot do. As such, as a team they needed to allow those with the ability to step in and do what they can't. That is how you work a team. As members of an Adamantite class party, they couldn't be reckless and insist when they knew they could do nothing. She stood atop the gates that lead into the cemetery and watched the beautiful scenery of fire and destruction. She saw the undead puppets moved at the command of their master in order to fulfill their purpose. The undead were far from finished with their mission of killing all life within the city, and she was getting massively bored. She could not truly believe that there were 0 people who were strong enough to make to her location. After all, the undead were simple skeletons that even copper-plate adventurers could take down, so why is it that no one worthy of torturing has arrived yet? Even if they have lured the more skilled adventurers to the Cat's Plains, there should be at least someone strong enough to get here already. Standing over their gates and walls that served to separate rest of the city from the cemetery and watching was not something she was keen on doing. She wanted to hear the screams of the suffering more closely and clearly. So fucking boring, she exclaimed. At the start of all this she had been happier and satisfied of the events that were unfolding, however that was a while ago. She now found her excitement having completely vanished, and so to remedy that she thought it would be good to at least participate in the beautiful massacre, and so she jumped down from her elevated position. Landing the ground, she was about to use a martial art in order to sprint, however she quickly held that thought. She heard the sound of footsteps and a malicious and devilish tooth grin marred her face. They were here, the poor souls who came only to be her torture subjects. Both Evil Eye and Lycaeus moved at top speeds as they ran towards the cemetery and the location of the mastermind of this whole ordeal. Neither of them used the flight spell, as they had reasoned that with the amount of negative energy that Evil Eye sensed, they were probably going to run into a powerful necromancer or a powerful lich, and if that is the case they need all the necessary magic power in order to win. Are you sure this is a good idea? Evil Eye asked as she kept pace with her team leader, her face always hidden behind the mask and her tone always sounding calm and controlled. She was the type that always kept her calm, and you could easily guess that her face always held a stoic expression. Her question to Lycaeus was not one that she asked out of concern that they might not be able to defeat the foe without their full team. Instead it was because her team leader proposed a rather daring idea, one that will prove fatal if careless. Of course I am, Evil Eye. You're the expert when it comes to the arcane arts, and because of that you'll need every bit of your mana to capture the enemy, and specifically because the enemy quite possibly might be a lich that I propose that idea. She explained. The idea was that both would face the foe with Lycaeus being the vanguard. This was a typical strategy that they used more often than not. How this time the circumstances were different. The enemy uses negative energy, which is something dangerous to living beings like Lycaeus, so in order to properly have a good chance Evil Eye would have to use a few spells to protect Lycaeus, but unfortunately the team leader is against that idea. It's also worth noting that they planned to capture the enemy. Due to their ties to the organizations Norn, the princess was certain that whoever orchestrated this attack on Yggdrassil was most likely just a single branch of the organization. As such, it is imperative that they extract all the necessary information from them. I understand what you mean, but it's too risky and dangerous. I have more than enough magic for us to defeat the enemy without issue. Evil Eye countered. The two of them were running while also dispatching any undead that they came across. Considering that it was just skeletons, they did not even need to slow down their pace. They were also maneuvering around houses and buildings as an attempt to search and find any civilians, but unfortunately they found only corpses. As they ran they did a sharp turn, exiting an alley and into the wide open street. This is... Lycaeus was immediately interrupted by a dagger that flew straight at her, and on pure instinct as an adamantite adventurer she evaded by jumping to the side. However, while their attention was distracted by the dagger, Clementine had immediately closed the distance and delivered a powerful kick at Lycaeus' torso, sending her flying back before doing a spin and delivering another swift kick at Evil Eye, who simply evaded the kick and jumped back a few meters. While that exchange happened, Lycaeus had quickly recovered from the kick, and in a burst of speed she closed the distance with Clementine and swung her sword at the assailant's waist, only for her dodge it by jumping over Lycaeus and doing a backflip. However, Lycaeus was quick on her feet. Before Clementine could land, she spun around and swung her sword again. Unfortunately, Clementine, having ninja-like reflexes, reacted quickly and used both her feet to jump off the flat part of her sword and launched herself a few meters away, opening the distance once again. You got it, was all Evil Eye needed to hear before sprinting towards the cemetery, which was the primary purpose. The main priority here was to get to the person that controls the undead, capture them and force them to undo the spell. With only a single glance the two of them were able to know that their attacker was merely a henchman. Lycaeus will easily dispatch her and meet up with Evil Eye once she's done. I suppose I can let one of you through, just to give Kaji-chan something to do. Clementine comments as she stared at Lycaeus. Clementine was for the most part impressed that ambush was not anything special, but the fact that the two were able quickly make the decision of how stay and who fights with barely any words was something impressive. Of course that only skews the odd in her favor. The Blue Rose leader quickly took note of that. She was being underestimated and the enemy was arrogant, something that gave her an advantage. An arrogant foe may be worse than a foolish ally, so they say. She thought as she took a proper fighting stance. How was the chapter? Any thoughts? Help this author improve. 11 comments, 0 vote. Death. Clementine v. Lycaeus. An arrogant foe may be worse than a foolish ally, so they say. She thought as she took a proper fighting stance, despite her inner thoughts. Lycaeus made sure not to be careless and remain cautious. The moon shone radiantly as it cast its light upon the scene, illuminating both individuals almost like a spotlight on a stage. There was a small wind that blew across the area and kicked up a small dust cloud that disappeared as soon as it formed. Lycaeus tightly gripped the demonic sword on her hands, Kilinirum, one of the 4 swords of darkness once held by the legendary Black Knight of the 13 Heroes. The sword itself was quite powerful, rumored to be capable of engulfing a whole city in darkness. Hanging above her shoulders and behind her back was 4 golden swords that floated freely, almost like she was holding them up with telekinesis. Looking at her enemy with a sense of urgency in her eyes, Lycaeus could clearly see what she specialized in terms of combat. Her armor and use of daggers gave Lycaeus much insight. Are we just going to stare at each other like this? Clementine asked and shrugged her shoulders as she did. While her posture was relaxed and seemed quite unserious, she was actually on guard. She was able to quickly recognize that her opponent was somewhat strong, and looking at the blue rose accessory atop her head, she had quickly surmised that the adventurer in front of her was a member of Blue Rose, an adamantite class party, and a person that she should not underestimate by any means. Perhaps I should have come fully equipped, she thought as she began to walk, but not towards Lycaeus but instead in parallel to Lycaeus and maintaining the same distance, an attempt to size her opponent up and to retrieve the weapon she threw when she ambushed them earlier. Unfortunately, Lycaeus was a veteran adventurer that paid attention to the battlefield and immediately knew what she was up to. She quickly launched one of the swords that floated behind her back, shooting it forward and forcing Clementine to jump back, dodging the attack and landed back where she previously stood. So her main weapon is that black sword, but with those floating swords she can attack from long range. I can also assume they'll act as her shields as well. I see. Clementine inwardly said to herself while assessing Lycaeus that she was neither safe from the distance and she was at a disadvantage at close range. Her specialty as a warrior was speed, agility, and a bit of stealth. Her main weapon was her extremely sharp daggers. She was fast and swift, but her reach was short compared to her. We'll test things out for a bit. Really, you aren't going to let me get my weapon? Letting me fight with a handicap, is that it? I mean, I don't mind, but wouldn't it be better to win when your opponent has all their weapons? Lycaeus did not respond to those words. Letting your enemy retrieve their weapons was a foolish and the height of arrogance, and she did not plan on making such a mistake. Being honorable and kind in a fight guaranteed death. She heard as her foe click her tongue in frustration before she took a stance that looked to be a running stance that had her back arched inward. Lycaeus had already assessed that the enemy would specialize in agility and speed as well as stealth to a degree, so with that in mind she waited with a bated breath for the burst of speed to come. Martial art. Flow acceleration. Clementine said before she burst forth with impeccable speed toward Lycaeus and immediately closing the distance. Lycaeus reacted quickly and swung her sword at the coming enemy, however Clementine evaded the attack by ducking low and running past her before halting her speed when she was behind Lycaeus. It was within a fraction of a second that Clementine spun and turned, delivering a spin kick at Lycaeus's back, but the attack was blocked by her floating swords that acted as shields. Clementine quickly adapted and used the shields as platform to jump over Lycaeus. Landing in front of her, she quickly pulled out her dagger and displayed her dexterity by flipping it before shoving her hand forward and tried to stab Lycaeus in the stomach. Lycaeus quickly blocked the attack with her black blade before delivering a devastating kick onto her foe's stomach and sent her tumbling on the ground, and as she tumbled on the ground Lycaeus followed up and sent one of the floating swords to impale Clementine. However, that attempt was fruitless as the blonde-haired psycho quickly rolled onto her feet and stood before parrying the blade with her dagger. Flipping her wrist, Lycaeus controlled the sword and sent relentless attacks that forced Clementine to dodge and parry, putting her in a defensive position and pushing her back. Shit. Clementine cursed as she realized that she was at a disadvantage, and each attack she parried from the sword seemingly became faster and more vicious. However, with each attack she moved back, meaning eventually the range of her foe will decrease, or at the very least her control should weaken. After all, she can't possibly control the sword from too far away. The sound of two blades echoed in the air, as their battle had now earnestly begun. The sense of urgency never left Lacu's face, and she needed to end the battle as soon as possible. As Clementine was thinking about the diminishing range of the sword, Lycaeus preemptively recalled her sword back to her and giving her enemy some breathing room. Of course, it would be ideal to tire her out with long-range attacks using the swords, however carefully controlling her swords from afar can get very tiring on itself. The act of controlling the swords is a low-tier telekinetic ability that comes with acquiring the swords, and using it drains stamina and drains you mentally, and she is often forced to resort back to close-quarters combat in a bid to conserve her stamina. Her style of attack relies heavily on speed, and she most likely targets weak spots, so I should be careful with using my floating swords and leaving myself open. Lycaeus inwardly thought her foe could throw her weapons, as such it was important not to leave herself vulnerable, not to mention the stamina drain when using the floating swords would make her sloppy. Lycaeus stared down her enemy, looking at Clementine began to think that it may have been a mistake to leave the other three behind. As leader she should have been able to understand that the person responsible for this would have underlings. The situation was already dire from get-go, and it didn't help that the plan was more of a search and rescue than come back to deal with the undead. Heavily mentioning the negative energy kind of shifted the priorities a bit. Lycaeus fancied herself as someone who was a problem solver rather than a planner. Whatever option saved the most lives or caused the least death always took priority. As a holy maiden, it was her duty to do so. This may have been a blunder on her part, but she'll do better next time. Taking too much time, so let's finish this. Their fight had barely started. No more than a minute had passed. However, letting negative energy linger too much was dangerous, so she needed to quickly capture this enemy before joining up with Evely and defeat the boss. Coincidentally, Clementine also had similar thoughts about concluding this battle. She would love to torture and hear the screams of the adamantite class adventurer and leader of Blue Rose. However, prolonging things is not going to be good for her, not when the enemy has an advantage in both long range and close range. I need to bypass her defenses in one go and get close enough that those swords won't be able to interfere. Clementine inwardly thought and began to prepare. Putting her dagger back in its sheath, she took an Olympic running stance, with her hand touching the ground, and her rump elevated up. Martial art. Ability boost. Her body glowed an orange hue as she further arched her back inwardly. A problem with this was the fact that it was extremely telegraphed and alerted the enemy of the coming attack. However, the boost in speed was a good trade-off. Greater ability boost. Lycius gripped her sword tighter and changed her own stance. Her sword, which she held in front of her, she now took a stance that had the sword on her side with the blade parallel to the ground and its tip pointing behind her. She leaned forward with her left shoulder sticking further out and her left knee forward. Her floating swords then stuck on her sides, two on each side, her gaze steely and her heart ready. Flow, acceleration, impenetrable fortress, pace of the wind. With her body having glowed a myriad of colors, she quickly moved forth in a burst of speed that left a small crack on the ground. Her body was lighter, she was faster than before, to the naked eye she would be a blur. Lycius quickly acted and sent two of her floating swords, but unfortunately they proved useless. Clementine parried one to the side and evaded the other, and with her speed Lycius wouldn't be able to call the swords back in time to help defend her. A smile appeared on the blonde-haired psycho. Perhaps torturing her isn't out of the question. Seeing her enemy's stance, she went for her torso. Pulling out her dagger once more, but this time the weapon crackled with blue electricity ready to pierce the flesh of an enemy. Lycius swung Kilinirum high, aiming to decapitate. However, Clementine evaded by ducking low and saw an opening for her to attack. She smiled in excitement as she pushed forward her handheld dagger, planning to gut out the woman's waist. However, a force collided with Clementine's stomach that was powerful enough to have her spit out volumes of saliva before she was sent flying through the air. Shit. I got careless. She thought as she flew in the air. She quickly flipped herself upright. Touching the ground with both feet, she slid back due to the force of the kick. As she slid, Clementine caught a glimpse of her enemy and saw her flick her fingers forward, like a command telling her to get closer. Realizing this, she tried to jump up, trying to dodge the blade, but it was too late. The two swords plunged themselves into her body. The pain of two blades piercing through her body registered in her brain, and she let out a painful scream that rung out in the air as she fell and tumbled on the ground. One of the swords had pierced from her back and through the stomach, and the other pierced right through her thigh. She coughed up more than a mouthful of blood repeatedly. Seeing the blood gush out of her impaled stomach and the unbearable pain, Clementine screamed once more and tried to pull the sword out, but her strength was draining fast, and the blood made it slippery. No. 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 I can't die like this. I don't want to die like this. She inwardly screamed as her body seemed to not have the strength to pull it out. Unfortunately, regardless of what she thought, no one would come to her rescue. Lycius quickly commanded her swords back to her. She then spun them around, removing the blood running toward her original destination. Regardless if the enemy is alive or dead, she was certain they won't be going anywhere. Such injuries and no potion could heal a hole in the stomach. I need to hurry. I hope you enjoyed this. Anytime a character gets this much screen time but isn't the Mikan, then you can probably assume they are important. 7 comments, 0 vote. Death. Knight in shining armor. Moments ago, the adventurers had found themselves swarmed by a legion of undead. They struggled to keep away and were being overwhelmed. The undead skeletons were a hurdle that they couldn't fend off. For each one they killed, another took its place, and their numbers didn't decrease and made their efforts seemingly meaningless. Each minute they spent fighting, trying to save themselves and the people, was a minute that took up resources. The potions redistributed by the guild to every available team were running out, and the undead did not even seem to be stopping. It did not quite help that the adventurers were mostly fighting in a defensive position, trying to protect the guild full of people rather than try and push the undead back. It also didn't help that the moment this began, some of the more inexperienced adventurers freaked out and got killed prematurely, making things a lot harder. The situation had been all around terrible, and they could only wait for the reinforcements or die. They could not escape anywhere, but they still held their ground. The odds were against them, but they persisted, and a majority of the adventurers had felt a sense of pride for being able to hold out. After all, they protected the people till the reinforcements arrived. That was something worthy of praise, right? That is certainly true. However, when a person with strength that surpasses your own arrives, one cannot help but lament the fact that they're weak, and they can't help but berate themselves for it. After all, what kind of losers struggle against skeletons? Weak low-level undead were laughable, yet they struggled against such creatures. They had no right to be proud of that. A young blonde man wearing shining armor and a sword strapped on his waist seemingly demonstrated this fact to them, showing them what a truly strong individual looked like as he eliminated undead with relative ease. The smile of joy that was plastered on his face spoke volumes about his strength and displayed the lack of a threat these undead were to him. It was a mocking smile directed to the hard work that adventurers had put into protecting the guild, or at the very least that is how they interpret the look of joy on his face. They watched in awe as the blonde-haired knight moved at speeds that surpassed their own by leagues. The undead that had seemed like a swarm that would overwhelm anyone could not get past him, like a wall blocking their path. With a single punch from him had enough force to destroy 10 undead at once, and when it seemed like a group was about to bypass him and get behind him, a single swing from his arm destroyed them, slicing them into dust. Not only that, but the adventurers could not tell if it was due to his speed or something else, but the undead could hardly land a hit on him. It was an impeccable display of power and skill that none could replicate and none would forget. "Who was that guy?" one of the adventurers asked as they witnessed the spectacle unfold before them. "Don't know, he must be a person the reinforcements sent ahead." Another answered with his eyes keen on what was happening, vigilant and waiting for a chance to act should an undead manage to get past the blonde knight. The adventurers were already aware that they would be a nuisance if they tried to help, so they stood by and will provide support should an undead slip through. By the looks of things, he just might finish of the undead by himself. When he got here, he got rid of the undead that were surrounding us. Now there's an escape route for the citizens, and now it looks like he's about to defeat a whole army of undead by himself. This is crazy. He has to be at least adamantite class. Whispers began to circulate around the spectators and some of the citizens, some speculating his identity and some making guesses about his level of strength. It didn't take long before a few began to cheer the knights on. The bleak and terrible situation had turned around and the looming threat of death was gone. The least they can do is cheer on the person responsible. Arthur was ecstatic. His body felt light as a feather as he moved with elegance and grace, dodging attacks from the undead and retaliating. He hadn't thought of himself as fast, however he seemed to be moving at unprecedented speeds that surprised him, but it was a welcome surprise. With fillet and dismantle he could obliterate the undead from afar while also being able to be close enough to punch them as well. With ultra instinct he didn't need to pay much attention on dodging. This is kind of fun, he thought as he used fillet to slice apart undead along with a few buildings. His body moved on its own and dodged multiple attacks aimed at his torso by moving back before retaliating, and punched forward, destroying a large number of undead in front of him. Once again his body moved. He quickly ducked down, evading a sword slash from the side that was aimed at his head. He then spun around and used his left leg, kicking to the side, clearing the undead from his left side. He also used fillet to destroy any undead on his right side, giving himself more breathing space. Unfortunately, despite his efforts, more showed up, filling up the numbers, almost as if they never decreased. "Okay, this is getting repetitive." He spoke. He was having fun killing undead and showing his strength. He didn't really think that this was something he was going to enjoy as much as he did. After all, he's just fighting undead and trying to fulfill a part of Renner's plan, but for some reason the prospect of fighting was something that was appealing to him, something he found it fun to do. It was exciting that he was using powers and skill, things he only ever saw on television. To put it more aptly, he felt like an anime protagonist and loved it. This was practically a dream come true. However, right now fighting skeletons was becoming boring. He wanted something better. "Sir Arthur." A voice he recognized shouted and pulled him from his concentration of the undead and turned his head towards it. It was Gazef, and it seemed like the reinforcements had arrived, or rather what took them so long. Arthur was certain they were right behind him when they entered the city. "Leave the undead to us. Your strength is needed elsewhere." Gazef shouted as he pointed upward towards the cemetery. While he was informing Arthur of what to do behind Gazef, the civilians were beloaded onto horses and were being sent off, allowing them escape from the city, and Gazef's warrior troops were already in arms ready to fight. Seeing this, Arthur smiled. Perfect. Arthur thought. Everyone had seen him hold off the undead and Gazef shouted his name. The first part of the plan is mainly complete. Now he just has to defeat Kahijit and further demonstrate his prowess. 2 more chapters and we close this arc. The next arc will be about 8 Fingers and dealing with that organization. I'll also try and build on the relationship between Mick and Renner. 16 comments, 0 vote. Death. Final 1. Arrows flew in the air as they shot towards the red-cloaked adventurer that is Evely. She quickly took to the sky using the flight magic spell and evading and dodging the attacks. She then used a low-level magic shield to block those she could not properly evade. Magic arrow. She yelled as golden arrow of mana flew from her fingertips and shot towards her target, but it was immediately dispelled as soon as it made contact with the undead archers, causing her to click her tongue and realize that she would have to kill the necromancer in order to get rid of the undead protecting him. The enemy retaliated with more arrows aimed at her. However, this time she cancelled the flight spell and dropped to the ground, successfully dodging the attacks. Unfortunately for her, the ground was swarming with undead that immediately attacked. Shard buckshot. Evely shouted as small crystal-like shards shot forward from her hands and scattered towards the army of undead that crowded her. The shards spread out and pierced through the swarm of undead, turning them to dust. It was almost as if she had shot rounds from a shotgun. That attack from her opened up a path for her that led straight to the necromancer. However, she could not take the opportunity as she was forced to turn her back and defend from behind. Having turned and prepared to launch another crystal lance, she quickly realized that being on the ground was a mistake, as the undead had already surrounded her and the opening she made had been already filled. Shit. She cursed behind her mask. She was trying to save magic power, however, until Lycius arrived. It seemed that was a mistake on her part. Seeing that she had no choice, she spread her arms open and prepared to use a higher tier spell that would get rid of the undead and give her some breathing room. Damn, no choice. Turn undead. A shout reverberated in the air, followed by a golden light that glowed bright and incinerated the undead before her. She quickly jumped up and used the flight spell once again, evading a dark energy sword slash released from the demonic blade. Killing the sword slash was powerful enough to completely destroy all the low-level undead that swarmed the place and opened up some space for Evely to land. However, arrows were still coming, forcing Evely to put up a crystal wall as a barrier. What took you so long? You weren't struggling against an opponent like that, were you? Evely spoke in a voice that held a mocking yet playful tone as she addressed her team leader. Lycius could only roll her eyes and shrugged her shoulders at the words of her vampiric friend. Evely was always one to take jabs at you, even though she was really worried. It was an annoying but endearing part of her personality. I'm not the one who was about to be overwhelmed by low-level undead, but yeah, keep talking. Lycius replied in her own mocking way that caused Evely to snort in amusement before responding. Please, these small fries are nothing, I was just waiting for you. Okay, if you say so. Lycius responded with playful doubt that caused the masked mage to harumph in a bit of displeasure, seemingly unamused that her strength was being called into question. So, what's the plan? You're the leader, you tell me. Lycius could only give her a deadpan stare, forcing Evely to hold up her hands in surrender and admit that she was just joking. I haven't figured out what his actual plan is, but it must have something to do with him standing at that mausoleum. His defense is a row of undead archers and 2 zombies that circle him. So, we need to bypass the archers and the zombies to get to him. He also might have a barrier around him, so we need to prepare for that as well. The 2 adventurers began to plan from behind the wall, while Khajiit observed the crystalline blue wall that was erected before him by the adventurers. The red short one was already a nuisance on her own. Now there was a second one who joined her and further held him back from achieving his goals. Clementine proved to be useless given the fact that she failed to prevent anyone from reaching this palace, and now she is probably dead somewhere, or she ran away when she found out she couldn't win against them. Humph, you think I will allow that? He spoke, before ordering both his zombies that were supposed to be his defense to attack his foes and interrupt their plans. While the amount of skin or flesh present when an undead is created can dictate the amount of will it has, and that in turn may make it difficult to control, this was not the case for zombies. Once an individual dies, their spirit and will permeates into their flesh once the brain has fully rotted, and since the body is dead, it rots and the leftover spirit within the flesh rots away with the flesh, hence why it's so much easier to control skeletal undead. However, zombies for the most part are fresh corpses, meaning that as long as you remove the brain beforehand, it's possible to control a zombie. Another way of controlling a zombie without going through the trouble of removing the brain is to have the person that will be turned into a zombie already be loyal to you. The 2 zombies at his side had sprung into action and attacked, both colliding with hard surface of the crystal wall. Khajiit was certain that wall they erected was because they needed time to plan and bypass his defenses. They also took out all the low-level undead he was using. While he can respawn them endlessly, he was also getting impatient. Using low-level undead to eat away at their stamina would work, plus the negative energy in the area will drain their stamina, however that will take too long. He was at the cusp of achieving his dreams and he did not want to waste any more time being held back. The best way to get this over with was to use the zombies as a distraction and summon his trump card. It will use up all the negative energy I have gathered, but no matter, the death and devastation I have caused here should produce enough to refill and conduct the ritual without issue. Having said as much, Khajiit then lifted the purple orb on his hand high up, and it let out a torrent of dark purple negative energy that began to permeate into the scattered bones of the undead, causing the bones to swirl like a tornado and began to take shape. As this was happening, the zombies that had collided with the wall and cracked its surface, as a fresh corpse, the strength of the zombie was definitely above average, and in a few more hits the wall should collapse. Rather than wait for that to happen, both Lycius and Evely acted. Deactivating the spell, the 2 adventurers came face to face with the zombies, and with zero hesitation Lycius acted first. Utilizing Killing, she burst forth with speed worthy of an adamantite class adventurer and bisected one of the zombies into 2 halves, and with swift movements she spun around quickly and did the same to the other one, easily dispatching of the threats, causing Evely to look her strangely. What? You couldn't have left one for me? It's not my fault you didn't react fast enough. Lycius retorted and shrugged her shoulders. Evely could only shake her head at her team leader's words. Both adventurers couldn't help but feel that they may have overestimated their foe and that the whole team could have easily handled this. In fact, with the other 3 members here, they could have finished this quickly and be done by now, or at least that's what they thought. Skeletal dragon, arise. The necromancer shouted as the bones coalesced into a definite form of a terrifying creature that had 4 limbs, a tail and had wings at its back. The creature was large, standing at 15 meters in height and with a wingspan of 10 meters. The dragon let out a roar that shook the ground. The roar reverberated and throughout the city and struck fear on those who heard it. The roar from the dragon caused the 2 adventurers, who seemed to have been relaxed, to open their eyes wide and let out a shocked voice as they laid their eyes on the mass of bones that formed a dragon. The 2 adventurers could only curse themselves for not ending the battle sooner. Okay, now it's 2 more chapters and we are done with this arc. 5 comments, 0 vote. Death Final 2. The necromancer shouted as the bones coalesced into a definite form of a terrifying creature that had 4 limbs, a tail and had wings at its back. The creature was large, standing at 15 meters in height and with a wingspan of 10 meters. The dragon let out a roar that shook the ground. The roar reverberated and throughout the city and struck fear on those who heard it. The roar from the dragon caused the 2 adventurers, who seemed to have been relaxed, to open their eyes wide and let out a shocked voice as they laid their eyes on the mass of bones that formed a dragon. The 2 adventurers could only curse themselves for not ending the battle sooner. Damn it, the strategy is now out of the window. What do we do? Evely exclaimed as she saw the mass of bones that was the skeletal dragon. The beast was massive, and it exuded a menacing aura that made her hair stand straight. Of course she was not afraid, and neither was Lycius. However, the beast's presence was something that quite intimidating. The strategy is still the same. We just need to take out the necromancer, and the dragon will disappear. Lycius explained. However, they will not be able to take out Khajiit without having to deal with the dragon first. She blundered with telling the other 3 to stay behind. This was a grave mistake she made as leader, and it was clear that she needed to do better. She let a single fact about the battlefield change her perspective on the severity of the situation. How many years has she been an adamantite class adventurer, yet she still makes such mistakes? Disgraceful. Ha. 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 Khajiit laughed as he witnessed the dragon in all its glory. The creature was magnificent, its bone form glistened in the moonlight, and he couldn't be happier with the result. Tightening his hold on the purple orb, he commanded his dragon to attack. Burn these foolish adventures to ashes, my skeletal dragon. What? The 2 adventurers could only exclaim as they heard the necromancer's words. The giant maw of the dragon opens wide, its jigger teeth opening wide as a purplish-black flame gurgled forth from its mouth and shot towards its target. The flames moved through the air. The intense heat they generated was hot. It melted the tombstones that were nearby as the flames rushed toward the 2 members of Blue Rose. Maximize magic. Crystal wall. Evely quickly cast a spell, and the flames collided with the wall made from crystal. Maximize magic was the type of metamagic magic that increased the effectiveness of any spell applied to it. It is an incredibly important subcategory of magic that was useful for all types of spells. Even weak offensive spells could be dangerous with maximize magic asterisk. Although there was a limit to its uses, as one cannot use the same form of metamagic twice on the same spell, although you could stack other forms to the same spell but only once as well. The flames collided with the wall, causing to shake violently. Evely could feel the pressure that was being exerted by the flames, and she held her hands forward and tried desperately to maintain the wall and make sure that it does not collapse. HNGH. Lycius, we'll need to move. The flames are too powerful. Got it. The wall cracked and both adventurers jumped in different directions, Evely casting the flight spell and Lycius jumping high up and landing on the walls of the gate that separated the cemetery the city. However, just as Lycius landed on the wall, someone landed at the same time as her, and before she could turn her head and see who it is, the person shouted. Holy shit, a fire-breathing skeletal dragon. Let's fucking go. Arthur marveled at the sight of the creature and truly cemented the fact that he was in fact in a fantasy world. Was it really a fantasy if you did not see a dragon or something close to one? The answer would be no, by his standards. Hearing the sudden outburst from the man, Lycius nearly tripped and she let out a dumbstruck sound that caused Arthur to turn his head towards her. Oh, sorry for that, the name's Arthur Pendragon. He quickly introduced himself to Lycius, who seemed a bit shocked for some reason. However, she quickly collected herself and introduced herself. My name is Lycius, my friend over there is Evely, nice to meet you too. Evely quickly flew towards them, but as she did, she noticed the dragon stop moving for a bit and caught a glimpse of the necromancer on his knees panting. It seemed like controlling the dragon took a lot of strength. She arrived and landed near her comrade. Cool, what's the plan? In order to get rid of the dragon we need to take out the necromancer. The problem is, in order to get to him we need to get past the dragon. Lycius explained and Evely concurred with her. Arthur figured they could have done this before he arrived here. From what he knows about Evely, she should be powerful enough to take on Khajiit by herself, or maybe Khajiit was much more powerful than the original. He certainly doesn't remember there being a skeletal dragon that breathed flames, which basically informed him that this was an AU like he suspected. I see, I'll take care of the dragon and you guys take on the necromancer. Taking a dragon by ear is crazy talk. It makes more sense if two of us take on the dragon instead. Evely countered his argument. With the dragon being as powerful as it is, it needs two people to handle it, one to draw its fire and the other to deal damage to it, as such as a person with the flight spell. She would draw its fire while either Lycius or Arthur deal damage. As they were discussing this on their peripheral vision, the dragon began to move once again. Khajiit, who had suddenly lost a bit of control over the dragon, but he regained it back and commanded it to move once again. The creature was quite the hassle to control, and those black flames that it produces required his own magic power, hence why he was panting, but the dragon draining him was unexpected. But as long he is careful, it should be fine. He doesn't have magic power to spare, but it should be fine, he hopes. The dragon flapped its bony wings and began to take off. See what I mean? Evely said as they saw the dragon begin to take off the ground. Technically, without proper wings the dragon should not be able to fly, however dragons have an inherent flight skill, so even in death they can use it. Seeing the dragon flying, Arthur responded to Evely. You make a valid point, however, consider this. The dragon roared once more, and again its scream shook the entire area as it charged at its opponents, planning to crash onto them using its head. Both Lycius and Evely were quick to take a stance, ready to jump right before it crashed. Consider what? It's charging at us. We'll jump before it hits. Me and Lycius will take it on, you deal with the necromancer. Evely ordered, however Arthur did not respond and simply raised his arm high up in the air. He took a breath before he swung it down like a blade, and with precision and accuracy, he completely split the skeletal dragon into two halves right in the middle of its nose, rendering the beast into a pile of bones that fell from the sky like rain. With a single attack Arthur was able to completely destroy the creature, and with seemingly no effort. Both members of Blue Rose and Khajiit could only stare at him in awe. For Evely in particular, such a display of power was something she hadn't witnessed in hundreds of years. See. Now we have at least a few minutes before the dragon reforms. Quickly dispatch of the necromancer. Arthur informed the adventurers, but they seemed to be in a bit of shock. While Evely was shocked to see such a display of power after a long time, Lycius, while in a bit of shock, she could not help but feel a sense of disappointment. She certainly is still young and has been considered to be among the fastest grown adventurers. She was near her 20s, yet she was an adamantite class adventurer. As such, being proud of her strength was warranted, but Arthur was the same age as her and managed to take out a dragon in one attack, something she can never to do. Arthur on the other hand couldn't help but feel excited and giddy inside. Seeing the shocked look on their faces, or rather the shocked look on Lycius, Evely has a mask, brought him a great level of joy. He has always wanted to flex like that in front of people, women, and now he has finally done that. Not only that, but having done that, once this is all over, having Blue Rose attest to his strength is an added bonus to the plan of outdoing Gazef. Hey! Get to it, or we'll miss our chance. Arthur spoke and reminded the two adventurers of the plan. Pulling out of their reverie, the two jumped in action, with Lycius moving at faster speeds than Evely, causing the short adventure to take note of this and raise her brow beneath her mask. Damn it, no. Seeing the two adventurers rush towards him, Khajiit screamed in anger as he threw the purple orb in his hand on the ground. Quickly using his staff, he activated a barrier around him to give himself enough time to properly think. Things had gone completely wrong and his dream was slipping. Not, it was already gone. The skeletal dragon consumes large quantities of negative energy and completely depleted his reserves. Not only that, he was also running out of magic power and practically powerless right now. He was not a match for the adventurers and the only route was to escape, but unfortunately right now he could not cast greater teleportation. No, damn it, I won't have my dream die here. Maximize magic. Mobile barrier. He shouted once more as the cold steel of a blade collided with his barrier. The strength of the attack was enough to crack the barrier and send him crashing onto the walls of the building, however his barrier was still intact. Maximize magic. Crystal Lance. Evely followed up Lycius' attack with her own. A lance made of crystal spawned into existence and shot towards Khajiit, who in turn evaded the attack, not wanting to waste any more magic power by letting the barrier get hit. However, Lycius was already upon him as she unleashed another sword swing at the barrier, this time completely shattering the barrier and leaving Khajiit vulnerable. However, the necromancer was not done. He quickly rolled to the side, stood up and cast another barrier again. Evely was about to cast a spell, but Khajiit spoke. I have a hostage. Those words caused both adventurers to stop in their tracks and not attack, allowing Khajiit a reprieve from the onslaught of attacks. He's lying. Evely denied. It was not uncommon for people to lie when cornered in order to buy themselves time. She has seen such things happen a lot. I'm not. His name is Enfira. He is a well-known pharmacist. If you kill me, he dies too. He informed, of course that last part was a lie, the boy was practically already dead. The crown of wisdom completely destroys the wearer's mind, rendering them into a vegetable, but fortunately for Kajit these adventurers knew nothing about that. If you listen to my demands he won't have to die, he said as he lifted his hand with 2 fingers raised. First and foremost he needed to replenish his mana so that he can make a full escape without issue, so he needs at least 2 magic replenishing potions and to escape without being pursued. Both Evely and Lachias stood in silence and waited for his demands. I have 2 demands. Unfortunately, his words were cut short as his hand was cleanly sliced off his body, his blood sprayed, and he let out a scream that rung in the eardrums of those present. He rolled on the ground screaming. Hey! Why did you do that? He was about to tell us vital information. Lachias was the first to speak, chastising Arthur, who simply ignored her words and spoke. Check the building, the hostage should be in there. How do you know that? Because he is a necromancer, any hostage he takes has to be close by just in case he needs an undead, plus what is the point of keeping a hostage far away from your location if you planned on using it? The 2 adventurers could only nod in agreement with his words. Arthur on the other hand was partly disappointed. He had expected the dragon to reform and be brought back like it did in the anime. If he was being honest, this was a disappointing conclusion to the fight. He didn't even get to fight Clementine. I'll look for the hostage then, you guys should keep watch on him. Evely informed as she separated from the group and entered the mausoleum, leaving Lachias and Arthur alone together in an awkward situation with only Kajit, who was groaning in pain, as the only source of sound. This was certainly an eventful day, hasn't it? He asked, doing away with the awkward silence. Indeed, it has been, but I am pleased it is finally over now. Lachias responded a bit too formally, but Arthur ignored that and instead tried to think of something else to talk about, but Lachias spoke before he could. Sir Arthur, could you satiate my curiosity? Sure, what's up? Why did you not use your sword? Surely that technique you used on the dragon would work great with a sword. She asked. First, when they saw the damages done to the buildings back when they had entered Yggdrassil, she thought the technique was the same one used by Gazef, the slash of light, but seeing how he defeated that dragon she had to conclude it was a different technique altogether. While that is certainly true to some extent, this blade on my hip is far too dangerous to be used casually. If I'm not careful, a lot of people might die. I see. Was all she said, and let the awkward silence settle back in. Arthur thought she might be pondering what he just said, however that was not the case. In her mind, Lachias was thinking of something completely different. Is he like me? First, regarding maximize magic, I could not find anything within the wiki that explicitly state that you cannot use maximize magic of defensive spell. I also don't remember Evely applying it to her defenses in her battle against Yuri Alpha Waifu, by the way, so I decide to take some liberties and change things a bit, plus this is so expect some minor deviances in lore. I already did that for undead. One more, and we conclude the arc. Thanks for your support, I appreciate all of you. 7 comments 0 vote. Finally over. When do you think he's going to wake up? Lachias asked, seemingly very curious about the recently rescued hostage. It was more than just curiosity, as she seemed very impatient. This was the second time she asked the same question in the span of 5 minutes, although she did change up her wording so that it would not seem too obvious that she was asking the same question. Should be any minute, now. Arthur answered, a bit curious about why Lachias seemed very eager to know that. However, he quickly realized that she was shown as an individual with a very active imagination, even going so far as to pretend that her sword was cursed and was trying to take over her mind. In short, she was in her cringe stage of life, a stage he is very familiar with and one that cripples him with cringe and makes his toes curl every time he remembers it. This in turn made him torn between wanting to interact with her and wanting to avoid her so he won't be reminded of his chunny phase. Do you think he's going to wake up a different person? She asked again. At the beginning she was a bit apprehensive about asking such things, mostly because she did not want to seem incompetent, but her suspicion that he just might be the same as her pushed her to want to converse with him. According to what Evely had said, the crown destroys the mind of the wearer, but the person who wore it should return to normal if the crown is destroyed as such. She wondered how that would work. I mean, if his mind was destroyed, then restructured, then sure, but I'm not sure. Arthur answered again. This time his own curiosity was piqued. If the crown of wisdom destroys the mind, then how is it that the person's mind is returned to normal once it is destroyed, unless it doesn't necessarily destroy the mind but does something close? Maybe he is going to have some memory loss and will go on journey to find out who he is. Lachias added. She placed her hand on her chin as she contemplated the effects of the crown on the former hostage. The idea of someone losing their memory and going on a journey to find out who they are was a tantalizing one to her, and one she thought would make for a good story. That is certainly a possibility. He could gather comrades along the way with different goals but who are also on a journey. And on that journey, they would encounter dangerous monsters and people who they'll be forced to fight, all the while forming a deep family-like bond together until eventually he realizes that he no longer need to find out who he is and that his current self and friends are enough and that they already give him an idea of who he is. That is certainly a possibility. Arthur responded with an amused smile on his face. It seems that Lycius was taking the idea further than it was necessary. Evely could not help but heave a small sigh beneath her mask. While for the most part Lycius was a serious individual, the leader of Blue Rose often had her own moments of childishness, which she supposed that it was to be expected as Lycius was not that old to begin with. She also did not expect someone who was a knight of the princess would much more straight-laced that what she was seeing, or rather the only person who worked for royalty that she knew was Gazef, and she was basing that assumption of him, but it was certainly nice that she did not have to be formal all the time. Why don't we stop with the fanciful ideas and stick to reality? She reminded them their conversation was entirely pointless. There was no need to consider those things, and they could just wait and see how things turned out once the former hostage woke up. Also, it's worth noting that the three of them decide to wait at the cemetery for a bit to check that there weren't any additional members of Zuranorn and guard the necromancer so that he won't pull anything near civilians. They also decided to knock him out and interrogate him later. We are sticking to reality, though. The possibility of anything is never zero. He's right, you know. Arthur answered and Lycius concurred. From what he remembers, Evely was quite the cold-hearted one, or rather she projected that type of image to everyone but her teammates, or at least that was how he interpreted the relationship between her and her friends. I suppose you are right, but still, things like that are unlikely to happen, so it's pointless to think about them. Arthur was about to give his retort to the vampire, however there was a groan that drew their attention. The honey-gold-haired boy that was the hostage opened his visible eye, the one that was not hidden beneath his hair. As he opened his eyes, he was assaulted by a headache that caused him to wince while his eyes saw three individuals that stood over him. Oh, you're awake. The knights and adventurers scrambled as they searched every house in the city and looked for anyone who might be missing, and the bodies of those who had lost their lives. While the undead were taken care of, there was still a lot to do, although they managed to rescue as many citizens as they could, with some having to get escorted by the knights as there weren't enough horses for everyone. The operation, for the most part, was successful, and the casualties were not exactly minimal but manageable. It seems as though things have finally settled down a bit. Gazef informed the guildmaster Ainz as he watched his knights run around searching, with some having found some dead bodies, although he did wonder if Yggdrassil needed some additional security to prevent any more incidents like this, or perhaps all the cities might need additional security. Indeed, Lord Stranoff, however, I don't believe this is over, or the very least. I don't think we should relax just yet. What do you mean, Sir Ainz? You see, this attack happened after I had sent adventures to the cats because there was some unexpected undead activity over there. However, those adventures haven't come back yet. Ainz explained with a bit of worry and unease laced over his tone. As a guild master, he could not help but feel a bit responsible for the adventurers and their lives. Gazef let out a hum as he began to contemplate what he had just heard. It was possible that this attack on Yggdrassil was a distraction for some greater that happened in the plains, and maybe Zuranorn had more attacks planned in the future and wanted to capture some adventurers. We're going to have to create a search party. All of this could be part of some ploy that we aren't aware of yet. I will inform His Majesty of this. I could ask for nothing more, Lord Stranoff. Ainz responded, and his head looked around, seeing the damage that the city had sustained, and could not help but let out a sigh of relief, seeing that the nightmare had finally passed and that now he could relax, but still never though he would see and hear the roar of an undead dragon. I must say, when I heard the roar coming from the cemetery and saw the skeletal dragon from afar, I nearly dropped to my knees. It was such a terrifying creature. Indeed, it was my first time seeing one, but lucky for us, there were people that could handle it quickly. Gazef spoke. His voice was relieved, however in his mind he could not help but feel dissatisfied and inadequate. As a knight of the king, he represents the might of the crown and the spirit of the royal family. As such, he should have been able to face that dragon, but yet when he heard its roar the first time, he could not help but feel threatened and fearful. As warrior, he is supposed to act in spite of fear, never let it hinder him from performance or stop him, yet he let that happen. And not only that, when he saw it from afar he knew he could not contend with it. If he was fully equipped maybe, but as he is now he could never hope to. Arthur was a knight of the princess and held a similar position to him. Not only that, but from what he has seen, Arthur was equal in strength to him, yet he managed to face that creature, something that made him feel relief he was not near it. Perhaps I got complacent. He thought to himself, perhaps staying around royalty and nobles for such long time had made him forget himself as a warrior. He does love his job and there is no greater honor in being the sword of the king. However, due to the position he holds, he became comfortable. He still trains regularly, but he is training to maintain his prowess, not improve them. Lord Stranoff, is something the matter? Not at the moment, Sir Ainz. Gazef responded with a small smile, which confused the guild master. Having realized his own mistake of complacency, Gazef had realized that Arthur was an individual that would make a worthy rival, a goal to surpass. He may not be as young as he wants to be, but that's not excuse to not aim for greater heights. A bit of a short chapter, but I didn't want it to be long either, just Evely and Lachias forming their opinions of Arthur and Gazef being inspired to try harder and grow stronger. Anyway, this week I went to register for the uni this year and my timetable is stacked, like really stacked, so my free time will probably diminish greatly this year, so the update schedule will shift randomly and I might even not update sometimes, so I'm just giving y'all a warning in advance. Chose not to cut this out so that y'all will know why there's such a slow update.